I need a character creator. I've been making all of these little games and things, and honestly, doing a few sprite sheets by hand is pretty enjoyable. But I'm starting to think bigger now. And what if I want like a huge crowd scene? Yeah, just draw 100 unique characters complete with walk cycles from all angles, I guess. In that instance, I need something that can bang them out a little bit faster. So I started looking at all of these different character creation tools, and how the games that I love have done it over the years. And after I finished playing Fallout New Vegas for another 50 hours, I realised that there just aren't a ton of games out there that do that for sprites. And the ones which do it in 3D are usually pretty slider heavy, getting the player to manipulate the mesh, which obviously won't work for me here. Eventually, however, I remembered something special, and that the solution I was looking for laid in probably the best character creation tool of all time.
Miis are customizable avatars introduced on the Nintendo Wii when it released in 2006. Using the easy-to-understand Mii Channel, you could create caricatures of yourself, family, friends, anything you wanted, really. What really made Miis so special at the time was how deeply integrated they were into the language and the soul of the Wii, with your Miis popping up as characters in games and social features, making games more engaging and tailored to individuals. Much like the Wii itself, the Mii Channel was designed so that anyone from children to their grandparents could understand. No need to pull meshes from abstract points or spend hours getting a face to look just right until you look at it from the side and see the true horror you've unleashed. Just pages of pre-made parts for your face, hair, glasses, etc. Despite its simplicity though, there's a surprising amount of room to make a Mii your own, with many options to easily adjust each part. Make this mustache bigger, move the eyes closer together, adjust the mole a little to the left. All of this in this simple design language that isn't intimidating. Miis and their editors have stood the test of time, being a core part of each Nintendo system ever since. Miis make up an estimated 4,000 characters that qualify to be added on the Mii library, the site where I'm documenting every Mii used in an official capacity. Check it out sometime.
I started out by doing some experiments with scaling in Godot. I wanted my sprite to be pixel perfect, and output at a small size that I could scale up later if needed, but I also wanted it to appear large on screen. Just displaying the whole project at a tiny resolution was one option, but I needed the UI to be much sharper, so I ended up creating a sub-viewport for all of my pixel art layers, which I could then scale up 10 times. This also has the benefit that whenever I'm scaling individual body parts up, I should get nice sub-pixeling to hint at that size, instead of everything immediately jumping to the next pixel along. Before really kicking all the sprite art into gear, I did decide on a couple of limitations. Number 1, no height or weight options. As nice as this would have been to have, it's the kind of thing that could quickly spiral out of control. And while male and female bodies could share common head parts, that wouldn't be the case for different body types. Where in the templates I've made up to now, I've typically adjusted the shapes of the heads to look just right. And as for height, it's never something that's really been in that Pokemon sprite style. So I decided not to complicate things. Number 2, I'm gonna have to leave out noses. I tried doing some little test sketches, and with the limited number of pixels I have here, there's just no way that it's not going to look a big mess. So with that settled, I decided to count up how many pieces I would need to draw. And that's when I realised my terrible, terrible mistake here. Yeah, it turns out that the Mii Channel gives you a hell of a lot of options to work with. There's not exactly a whole lot that I can change here, but I did decide that for now, I would limit my sprite sheet to a 4-way walk cycle instead of including diagonal movement as well, as this would half the number of sprites that I would have to draw. Front, back, left and right, instead of in-betweens for each of those as well. So the 2 body types I just draw in the default red colour, as I can palette swap them in a shader later when we take things into Godot, which should help keep my assets folder free of too much clutter. They're super simple outfits, but I do spend a bit of time here putting a nice swish on the dress as a step forward, which hopefully gives the body a little more definition. Next up, the Mii Channel gives you like 8 different shapes to use for the Mii's head, and making these shapes really defined and obvious in a limited number of pixels was maybe the most fun part of this whole thing for me. I knew that I was going to have to make each hairstyle fit across all of these, so the approach that I took was to trace the same outline for all of them from my original template, but only on the very top of the head and around the ears, because that's where the hair would sit. And then I could elongate or flatten the jaw as needed to get the right shape across. I only ever really increased the vertical size by a pixel at most, but it was plenty to make some really unique and fun shapes. It was a little more difficult getting those across on the side profiles, but I think they're all close enough to work when the character will spin around. Oh, and stuff like the eyes and mouth, I knew that I would be replacing later, but for now I just left them here as a reference point for myself to work with. After that, the other tab on the head page, I think internally is known as facial features, but I just referred to it in my project as makeup. Things like blush on the cheeks, some 5 o'clock shadow, deep wrinkles. This was all relatively subtle stuff that I could draw around the main features, and was a fast run through. It ended up being the same quick job for a few of these, including eyebrows and all of the facial hair. To stop myself from slacking off, I thought I'd just follow the Mii Channel tabs from left to right, and that meant that I was already at the most painful job, the haircuts. All 72 of them. Like, did you know that there were 72 of them? You could have warned us at least when I started out. I've got to do 4 drawings for each of them. You know how boring that's going to be working on one time? With so many to get through, I quickly developed a strategy of putting down the general shape I wanted in a brown base colour, drawing over the outside edges in a medium opacity black for a more cartoony defined outline, but not losing too much of the shape. Using a lower opacity black to try and get some indication of the strands of hair, drawing in individual locks that flow roughly the right way, before throwing in a few more pixels just to break those up a bit so they wouldn't be too perfect. And finally going in with a low opacity white on a soft light blending mode, getting some nice highlights in there that would mostly obey where the light source is. That all worked quite nicely up until I got to the longer hairstyles. Remember how I'd kept the top of the head shapes the same so that the hair could sit on top of them? Well, if I have to draw hair that's coming from the back of the head down past the shoulders, on some of the head shapes that's going to be overlapping the face in a way that just makes no sense, given that it's supposed to be coming down from the back. So to solve this, what I ended up doing was creating a totally separate layer that would only have hair coming down from the back of the head, and I could place this on the sorting layer behind the head and just enable it for the appropriate longer haircuts. In an ideal world, I would have made unique versions of this for each haircut, but I've got a lot of these to do and I'm on pretty limited time, so one will have to get the point across. Eyes had the second highest number of unique parts at 48, and considering I'm working with like 4 pixels, I don't really understand how I managed to make all of these their own thing. What helped, I think, was including some creases in the skin here, which let me get a lot more emotive for very little added noise. I was a little worried about being able to line up the glasses properly with the eyes, but leaving that layer active to draw on top of made it a breeze. And for the ones with some tint, I just added a solid colour with lower opacity. And after a lot, I mean a lot of drawing, it was finally time to bring everything into Godot. Using the test character we made earlier, I went through adding all of the layers I would need to make a sort of paper doll thing where you would layer everything up together. Kind of like those old Flash dress-up games you might remember if you're as old as me. Or if not, like the same way those scammer guys made NFTs, I guess. Next up, I started putting together a rough version of the UI we'd be using with Godot's rather nice to work with control nodes. Seriously, there's nodes specifically for a tab bar and tabbed pages we can throw stuff into that all just works right out of the box. Good stuff. So, when I was putting together all these pages and hundreds of buttons together, I decided to just use this image of the Godot logo as a placeholder. And that's pretty standard practice for many game developers. Make the thing work first, and then you'll have a better idea of where to spend time making your art assets. I've never really loved working this way. It's why I usually do all of my art first, because then I get so much more of a motivation boost seeing all of the pieces come together into something that resembles the final result. And not having that here really made this section of the project drag for me. Regardless, I got buttons in that would select each sprite, the adjust buttons in, which were kinda janky. Like, when I would enlarge or rotate sprites at this scale, they would just get completely blown out and become unrecognizable. I eventually partially fixed this by enlarging those sprites to be 10 times bigger in Photopea, before scaling them back down to be 10 times smaller in Godot. Which sounds a little weird, but gave the program a much better idea of what those enlarged sprites should look like, and worked reasonably well. Just be careful rotating things. At this stage I also got palette swapping in, meaning it'd be super easy to recolor any item. I have the creators of the Godot palette swap shader to thank for this. A really great add-on I stumbled across which spits out a palette for any texture you give it. Then you can just add in another row of the recolors you want, and the shader will swap them over on demand. I used this for pretty much all of the recolors, but did it manually in some cases where I had multiple palette swaps to account for, mainly to do with the Mii's favourite colour. So here I had a new sprite sheet for each hat colour, and then could swap that out as needed and just worry about the hair. With all of these buttons hooked up, and me still working blind to test anything out, it was at long last time to make this thing look nice. Most of this was done using Godot's theming system, with 9 sliced textures for the buttons and background elements that would stretch to fit anything I could throw at it. I tried to keep everything true to the era, with some pixel art touches. Like for the background gradient, I just had 3 different colours, and used this divering pattern to blend them in a satisfyingly smooth way. Other than that though, it was cool to notice all of the work that had gone into making all of the buttons and things very representative of physical touchable buttons. Obviously this was all made before flat design took over, and everything has a nice bevel or gradient on it. Things are animated and feel very tactile. This carries over to these subtle animations when the pages change, buttons dropping in and out because they're physical things that exist in the space. And when you press them, there's a big, obvious result with these sparkles to make it clear you've done something. Finally, I have something mostly functional that, if I do say so myself, is looking pretty good. So if I want to use the Miis I've created, I have to export them somehow. I did this by getting the texture of that original small viewport that we're looking at a zoomed in version of, and capturing a reasonably big section of it so that I don't have to crop off any bigger details. After that, I want to get rid of any transparent margin on the sides, so we step through each pixel on an X and Y axis until we get to one that's not transparent, and then we start copying over the texture from there before saving that to a PNG. I step through the walk cycle in an animation player, doing this for each frame, and doing the same for each angle the Mii is facing. And then we'll have this nice set of sprites ready to be used for whatever later. One failure I had with this project is that I really wanted to make this compatible with the real Mii format, so that you could load in your Miis from a console and vice versa. And I looked up all of these different lists of the data structure from the Wii and the 3DS in various states of completeness. But at this stage, the project was really dragging on, and I just didn't have the time to troubleshoot. I did get this code out of this attempt, but when I tested it on an online viewer, it just wouldn't output anything. I tried copying over the first few bytes from another Mii from the Mii library, just to test. And... I was pretty skeptical that this would have looked all that great to begin with without a lot of tweaking. So for now, I just decided to save and load my project as a JSON file. That way me or someone else could still maybe allow importing them in a different game. That's if I don't come back to fix this one day. Otherwise, I was about ready to call this thing done. But what would the Mii channel be without that iconic music? So I took a shortcut here and found a really old MIDI file that had been posted online like a decade ago, and set the instruments to the Pokemon Heart Gold Soul Silver sound font. And with that, I think I'll let you all check it out for yourselves and let the final result speak for itself. I'll be posting it on itch.io for everyone to play with. Thanks to HEYimHeroic for helping introduce some of the history of the Mii channel at the start of the video, and for being the source of so much valuable information in the process of making this. Please go check them out. And I'll see you all real soon.